Okay, great. So thank you, Koren and Nicole, for joining us.
Thank you.
Can you give us your kind of 60 seconds to 3 minutes elevator pitch about Sonosim? That'd be great.
Certainly. So it's very nice to be here today. Sonosim is a MEDTECH education company, and we started at UCLA. And what we do is we provide the easiest way to learn ultrasonography for a variety of healthcare providers. And we respond out of UCLA. Our CEO and president is still a practicing emergency physician here at the university and a clinical professor of emergency medicine. And I'll let Nicole talk a little bit about this, but early on, he was very interested in providing education in a number of different arenas that he taught in overseas and otherwise. And so he thought, what can I leave behind when I go on these medical missions? And we started with multimedia-based medical training programs. And that's where we got our start. And in the context of that, he also became very interested as a practicing physician in ultrasound. This is really the stethoscope of the future. You can actually, let's take a look and see what's going on inside someone. And but of course, when you look at that imagery from sonography, it still is quite confusing often and unclear of what you're actually looking at. So we started collaborating with UCLA CS, computer science, on can we develop a low-cost, high-fidelity simulator to easily scan through a number of different ultrasound scans. And that's what led to our company. And do you want to talk a little more about SIM or the
sure.
genesis?
So Koren and I have been working together for over 10 years now. Like she mentioned, we started here at UCLA. There was a nonprofit called the Center for International Medicine. So about 10 years ago, we were trucking around in a refugee camp in northern Kenya, creating some computer-based education for healthcare providers there. Now we're running a MEDTECH, EdTech company here in Santa Monica. So the journey's been really interesting. But throughout the work that we were doing at the Center for International Medicine, as she mentioned, Dr. Savitsky was really seeing the emergence of point-of-care ultrasound. And through that, really looking at what are the barriers to teaching and learning ultrasound. And if you think about being able to teach ultrasound at scale, you really have to have three main components come together all at once. A qualified instructor, having an ultrasound machine available, and then having a patient with pathology in front of you. And if you think about trying to train 50 residents, 300 medical students, the ability to kind of congeal all of that together in a teaching moment for everyone is really challenging. So that's where the idea of Sonosim really began, thinking about how can we create a scalable solution for ultrasound education and training.
So I want to do a little bit of a deep dive of two issues you mentioned. One is, tell us about the journey from, I think you said, the refugee camp to Santa Monica. So
Sure.
How did you end up in Santa Monica? It seems very far from where we started.
Yeah, so even when we were running the nonprofit center, we really wanted to build on what Los Angeles is good at, and particularly what UCLA is really good at. So we really always looked at this convergence of medicine, engineering, and digital media and how they come together. So for us, LA has kind of always been our home. Santa Monica is kind of where we ended up, just a stone's throw from UCLA, but really continuing to build on what LA is good at. And when we were working at the nonprofit center, we were doing very similar projects. At that point, they were grant-based, but still looking at how you can use computer-based education for training healthcare providers at scale. During that time, we were working on a number of different topics, not necessarily ultrasound-focused, but point-of-care ultrasound was kind of emerging at the same time. So that was something that we had identified as really an up-and-coming area of need in terms of training. So then there was some research and development that was done here at UCLA, which ultimately led to the IP that spun out into Sonosim.
Okay, so this morning we heard a talk by the Google, I'm not sure what his title is, head AI engineer, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you think that the ultrasound next generation would be all based on AI, and where would that leave you as a company?
So that's a very interesting question. So the role that we play is in training, obviously. And in the near-term future, we strongly believe that, of course, there still will be a role for the healthcare provider, although AI will increasingly play an important part in complementing that role and facilitating that role. Our CEO also believes that it's a growing area that will ultimately help take some of the art out of medicine, which he actually thinks is a great idea, which is interesting to me.
So, no, the previous company with Genomics, they told us that they received an investment for a strategic partner. And you have a similar story. Can you tell us about your relationship with your strategic partner?
Yes, so we have developed relationships with strategic partners since the get-go, since we're an adjunct technology that, basically you need an ultrasound machine in order to be trained on that ultrasound machine. So we see that as very symbiotic. So we've worked with Laerdal Medical with their simulators on developing joint products that allows on their SimMan and their SimMom ultrasound modalities to be used. And then also we have an investment with General Electric Healthcare.
So is there any downside working with strategic as investors, or is it all good?
Well, of course, there's two sides to every story.
Yeah.
No, for the most part, it's been fantastic. However, of course, we're a very small company to very large fish, so you're always dealing with balancing your priorities with your strategic partners' priorities. That is probably the biggest balancing act. When we initially started working with GE, we had a contract from them. Part of our deal with them is they do some distribution of a very minor part of our product. And the contract was about 50 pages of very fine print, and that took quite a while to decipher and figure out. But what hasn't killed us has made us strong.
Okay. So let's talk about that. I mean, tell us a story, something that went terribly wrong along the way, and how were you able to solve it?
I think, when you're growing a company, the list is endless. But I think, Koren and I were talking about this over lunch. I think remembering back to the days when we were first starting out, there were a number of different grants that we were going after. Koren could probably talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of those, but that were just a little bit tangential. There was a meeting this was before my time even, but that Koren and our CEO and one of our lead engineers had presented a demo to at Sonosim, which is another ultrasound manufacturer, with at the time was a haptic device. And she said in the group, she's like, I don't even know if this thing is going to turn on at the beginning of the demo. But really just kind of understanding the market maturity at the time when you're starting out and identifying kind of what product the market needs at that time, I think is some of the most interesting lessons that we've learned over time. I think at the beginning, there was probably, just a little bit of diversion. You're just looking at different areas of innovation that you could potentially pursue, but ultimately it's what product are people going to buy today, and developing and really understanding the direction that the market's going to go.
Do you have our probe on?
I do, yes.
So we really started from soup to nuts, and initially, this is our ultrasound probe that we use to scan through a number of real patient data cases. And when we got our start, we had rented space in a small office building, and we were so excited about it. But every time the wind blew, it rattled it. We stood on the deck of this thing, and we spray painted the screws black that held this little probe together. So we learned from the ground up of how to make it work.
That's not how these are assembled anymore.
Not anymore. Exactly.
But at the time. Yeah, so even things in manufacturing, because we have a hardware component, so primarily software-based, but also there's a hardware component. So, there's things that you learn in manufacturing processes and quality assurance, and things that you don't think of when you're first getting started. That you're continuously learning lessons along the way.
So, what's your next big milestone? What are you working for now?
Well, like our friends at Genomics, we're in a Series B round, or looking for a Series B round now for this year, and we have all kinds of exciting development happening. For us, it's all about scaling. We're constantly reaching our next group cadre of healthcare providers that we're looking to train, incorporating new features, depth of content.
Good. Any questions from the audience?
It's an interesting question. So we're a different company now that we're looking into a Series B world than we were at Series A. Much more mature. Right now, we're a software as a service company with some with still a little bit of a hybrid on-premises software component, and so that's kind of appealing to a different investor. The investment world now is quite different than it was 5 years ago when we were looking for some initial funding. So,
did you compare between the conventional way and your way? I mean, this new technology,
sure.
And find out some kind of measure of effectiveness or improvement?
I love that question. Yes, in fact, we partnered with UCLA to do that. So UCLA Crest has run a series of efficacy studies on our product to evaluate whether the Sonos simulator is as effective as an on-site instructor. And in most cases there, we don't see ourselves as a replacement for instructors, but we do see ourselves as a complement.
I think that was also a really important piece at the beginning for us, is actually having a validation study that was done early. Because once you're actually out trying to sell a product, people want to know if it's effective. And so having that data to back that up at the beginning when we were first getting started selling our product was really important.
If I may, have you looked at your economic, what kind of saving were you able to produce, or at least make real based on this approach?
Yeah, so one thing that our product does, which is unique, is that really what we're trying to solve for is allowing a large number of students be able to practice anytime, anywhere in ultrasound, to scan through a bunch of cases, to access excellent peer-reviewed ultrasound courses, and do that in a flipped classroom environment. So it's sort of a different model because you're not going to have that widespread ability to access a patient, an ultrasound machine, and an instructor that can then give you feedback as you're going through these cases. So it's providing that access widespread.
Question back?
I know it's a little different, not the education part of it, but do you see that at some point these smaller ultrasound can be administered at home?
It's definitely conversations that are ongoing. I think we're seeing the handheld ultrasounds become more prominent, and you're seeing them kind of penetrate a lot of other specialties that weren't using them 10 years ago. So there's definitely been conversations about at-home use. I think we kind of see how the market does, even with just the adoption of the smaller handhelds. For us, it's whichever direction it goes, for us it's beneficial because that just means more people need to be educated and trained. So it's an exciting time in terms of the market evolution to kind of watch and see which direction it heads.
I'm just wondering, as someone who's also has a health tech device, if you've learned how to educate people on how to use devices to manage healthcare, there's a lot of us creating devices right now, and the educational component is missing for a lot of us. Have you thought about taking any of that learning and sharing that, or are you planning to, because I think this is the gap that I see in the market right now. Because everyone's coming up with a wearable, or monitoring this, monitoring that, testing this, validating that, but clinicians still don't know how to use these new devices, neither do physicians, and consumers sure don't. And a lot of it being just put out into the ecosystem. Have you considered looking at that?
Hey, that's another interesting question. I think for us, slightly tangential experience has been the lack of standardization amongst training institutions specifically for ultrasound. So it's not mandated that you need a certain number of hours of ultrasound education to graduate from medical school or a residency, for example. So that differential has provided some challenges for us in figuring out how to effectively sell into a market that is not regulated or really standardized. We do really fit into the world of training, either institutionally or we do also train individual physicians. But I don't know if we're facing exactly the same issue, since we are specifically a training level or a training product.
Dina?
I had a described yourselves as a medtech, edtech,
Mm-hmm.
and so that intrigued me from the perspective of how do you figure out who to approach if you're in this sort of convergence of those two things?
Yeah, I think to some extent it depends where the market is a little bit. So right now what we're finding is that it's a pretty interesting investment community moment where there's a lot of interest in SaaS-based business models and obviously a lot of interest in AI and machine learning. And so to the extent that we can portray ourselves honestly as a business that fits into one of those modalities, that's been effective for us. So right now, the SaaS is a pretty interesting world for us to play in. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
So how do you monetize? Who's your buying persona? What's your business model?
So we sell to institutions. So if you're a medical school, you might buy our program sort of as an enterprise solution for all of your medical students, and they would be trained in ultrasound. Or if you're an individual physician and you want to learn ultrasound individually, you could take our course, and that would have the equivalent. They're CME accredited, so it would be the equivalent of going to a conference. You would get those credits, and you'd also learn this skill. So it ranges from B2C to B2B.
So last question. There are many people here are trying to think about starting their own new business, new company. Any advice for them for their first initial very difficult steps? Especially about taking something from academia, from UCLA.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
Yeah.
I would say definitely stick to your core competencies. Don't try to reinvent the wheel of things that are available off the shelf. We had very early on conversations about whether or not we should build our own learning management system. We ultimately didn't do that, but we were entertaining the idea at the beginning and realized that's not our core competency. Let's just stay focused. The other thing that I think is really important is building a brand very early on so that people know who you are, they know what you stand for, they know what your mission is. That has helped us tremendously. And continue to listen to your customers and can keep iterating your product as you hear from them.
Have fun.
Great. We had fun with you, so thank you very much for joining us.